The Synod on Youth is coming up. It seeks, inter alia, to find more proper language and expressions to speak to young people. Often the liturgy is a point of compromise or accommodation of the, what we say, alleged demands of the youth. Mm-hmm. Teen rock masses are an example. We didn't ask for it. The youth yearn for that which they have been so deprived of, the beautiful, the transcendent, the truth. You have met many young people on pilgrimage. Is the traditional liturgy an outdated means of communication with the youth? Should tradition have a voice at this synod?
Absolutely. I think that we make a big mistake if we simply lump all of our youth into one category and presume that they all like what we have been feeding them for the last several decades. I think that it would probably be true to say that the majority of youth would prefer, at this point, a more lively, if you will, form of celebration, especially with regards to the music used in the sacred liturgy. But why is that so? It's because this is what we have fed them for the last several decades, with the presumption, as you say, that this is what they want. This is what they find relevant. And we have not taught them the tradition. We have not exposed them to our common heritage, our Catholic tradition. The Mass and the history of the sacred liturgy through the centuries, was developed in a very powerful and beautiful way that led to adoration and contemplation, as well as communion in the sacred liturgy. I think after the reforms of the Second Vatican Council, it seemed like, any holds on the liturgy were removed, and developments happened that the Council Fathers surely never intended. And I think that some of the forms of music that has been admitted into the sacred liturgy is a good example of that. There are examples where music that is used in the sacred liturgy continues to be used that really violate the very principles that the Church has delineated for what constitutes sacred music in the liturgy, and in the documents prior to the council documents themselves, and every official document on sacred music since the council, official document, has pointed in a certain direction that seems to have been largely ignored. So I think youth today perhaps respond to what they have become familiar with, and what we have fed them, what we have sort of raised them on. But what I find is that when young people are exposed to something of a more traditional nature, the extraordinary form being a good example of that, or even a more traditional celebration of the ordinary form of the liturgy, especially with regard to the sacred music, it opens up a whole new world for them that many young people just find so spiritually nourishing. And I think we need to pay attention to that. And I think we need to be respectful of our tradition and how young people respond to that. We had an occasion at World Youth Day in Krakow that the liturgies in the English-speaking Mercy Center throughout the whole week of World Youth Day were of a much more contemplative, a much more, I would say, beautiful kind of character. And it was much more in line. It was in line with what the Church is asking for, even though it was some of it was contemporary composition. It was contemporary composition that reflected our tradition, and the liturgies were beautiful. They were contemplative. There was adoration. There was a prayerfulness that really brought that community together in prayer. And then the very last liturgy, we went back to what we've all become used to, the very lively kind of loud instrumentation and music that it was jarring. I know for my own pilgrims, they were jarred by the contrast, and much preferred the more quiet contemplative liturgies that they had earlier during the week, which I think is very interesting and very telling. So I think we cannot stereotype our young people, and we can't put them in a pigeonhole and say they all want this or all are like this. I think we need to be much more broad-minded, much more open-minded toward tradition, and watch how young people respond to when they are exposed to their Catholic heritage in the sacred liturgy. I think they have a right to their own heritage as Catholics, and I think the more we provide that for them and teach them about that, I think great things are possible.
With respect to various concerns, including faith, today's youth struggle with a sense of identity. This has driven many to look to their roots. Their curiosity and formation of identity in time-honored tradition should be fostered. Should teaching of Latin and chant in Catholic schools be employed to introduce more Catholic youth to the rich treasure of the faith? Shouldn't the most beautiful and ornamented spaces be the chapels in our schools?
That's a very important point you make. I think it's about creating a Catholic culture for our young people, exposing them to their own tradition, roots them in a culture and an identity as Catholics that is timeless. It's not just of the here and now. It's not just of what's sort of relevant today, but it truly does root them in their own identity as Catholics, and putting them in touch with a tradition that as members of the body of Christ, as part of the communion of saints, we are not just in communion with those who happen to be on the earth now. We're in communion with the whole communion of saints, all of those who are in heaven, all of those poor souls in purgatory. But our communion isn't just across the world, but it's across the ages. We are in communion with the great saints that have gone before us throughout the ages of the church. We need to be inserted in that. We need to understand how we are in this tremendous flow, this tremendous line of tradition. And I think that the more we put young people in touch with that tradition through some of the things that you mentioned, through the Latin, which is, it is still the mother tongue of the church. And it's not only is it good to put them in touch with Latin for the sake of the church and our faith, I think learning Latin is a great exercise preparing young people to learn other languages, especially the Romance languages, even English. I learned more about English studying Latin than I ever did in any of my language arts classes, because you train the mind to really understand the makeup of language. But putting them in touch with that then also gives them access. I just regret as a young person growing up, I never, not only did I not have to take Latin, it wasn't even available to me in high school, where it was available to my father in a public high school back in the 30s and 40s. But it opens up a whole new world to be able to read some of these things in their original language. It puts them in touch with the liturgy and to be able to understand the liturgy even better when it's celebrated in Latin, and especially in the traditional form. I think exposing them to chant, Gregorian chant, is a complete eye-opener for them. It was for me. I had never heard of Gregorian chant, let alone heard it, until I was a college student. And I was taking a course in music appreciation at a secular university, the history of Western music, and where did we have to start? We had to start with chant, Gregorian chant. And the first time I heard it, I'll never forget the first time I heard it, something welled up in me. And it's hard to explain, I don't mean to be overly sentimental about it, but something happened inside of me to the point that I ran out and ordered a recording of Gregorian chant. And as a young male university engineering student, very right brain, I used to just put on my headphones and I'd listen to that Gregorian chant. I didn't have a clue what they were saying. I knew zero Latin at that point. But there was something in the chant and something in the music of it that opened up a whole new world for me. I was talking actually to a psychiatrist that was explaining to me that the chant opens up a side of the brain and a part of the brain that opens us to the transcendent, to meditation, to contemplation, that normal kinds of music, if you will, music with rhythm, music with a beat, doesn't do. So there's actually a physiological event that happens in our brain when we're exposed to this. So exposing our young people to these things puts them in touch with their rich tradition that they are a part of, and gives them, I think, that sense of identity. Because I think you're right, young people are searching for identity and meaning in their life. Who am I? Why am I here? What is the purpose of my life? What is the ultimate destiny of my life? This is what the faith provides for our young people, and to give them this deep identity, I think gives them that security that they really are looking for, to know who they are and to the eternal destiny to which they're called.